We're on. My name is Ryan Hill, and I am part of this panel, which will actually function like a roundtable. We'll use a roundtable format. Today, we're discussing promoting leadership for democracy and social equity. We are on the conference track, building nonprofit capacity with the integration of social equity. I have three additional panelists today. The first is Nadya Dutchins, followed by Professor Dr. Jay Hooper, and then we also have E.B. Smith. I'm gonna ask Nadya to introduce yourself to our participants.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nadya Dutchins. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota. My family is from Guyana, and I am also the executive director of the American Humanist Association, which is headquartered in Washington, D.C.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nadya. Dr. J, would you introduce yourself to our participants?
Hi, everyone. I am Jay Hooper. It's so good to see all of you. I hope wherever you are that you are safe and that you feel in this space also welcome virtually. I am bringing you greetings. I'm actually currently located right now in Susquehanna Valley, which is located in Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania to be more exact. And I am originally from the Bronx, New York. So really, really good. And also, I serve as a clergy leader within the ethical culture movement, as well as I am also with the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, which is a Unitarian Universalist congregation. And I think that kind of serves all the things that I do, in addition to probably many other things, but that will be unpacked as we move through this.
Thank you so much, Jay. And EB, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to ask that you introduce yourself to our audience, and then I'll introduce myself.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry, I was running a little late today. I was trying to find a place to Zoom in. I'm currently in Stratford, Ontario, and I will put a land acknowledgement in the chat. I have formerly the director of artistic inclusion at the Cleveland Playhouse, and I'm currently the chair of the anti-racism committee at the Stratford Festival, as well as partner and senior consultant at H.C. Smith Limited. We are a retained executive search and consulting firm out of Cleveland, Ohio. And I'm really happy to be here speaking with all of you today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, EB. And again, I'm Ryan Hill. I'm a creative and analytical lover of humankind. That's what I call myself. I have a background in finance exceeding 15 years, but now I am a faith leader, and I work as a board member of LGBT faith leaders of African descent. And I also volunteer as a faith leader with Equality New York, advocating for policies that benefit Black and Brown LGBT communities. And I also am a DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion consultant. So again, for those of you who just joined us, this is a panel. However, we're going to use a roundtable format, and I'm going to serve double duty as the moderator slash panelist. So we're going to go ahead and begin with our first question. And the first question is, can you please provide your personal definition of diversity as a leader and provide an example of what that would look like in an organization? And I'm going to first pose that question to Jay.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I think when we engage the idea of diversity, especially within the context that I work in, which is congregational settings, I like to think of, and particularly because I serve humanist congregations, I think it's very important to actually get back to what the word really means, which is this sense of belonging and gathering together and communing together, and use it as an antonym for segregation. It's been one of my largest frameworks within the traditions that I serve, because most of my folk have engaged with religious trauma of some sort. And so when we think about that, I ask the question, what is, and that's it, I will definitely answer that. When it comes down to engaging with humanist settings are often non-theistic, atheistic, or agnostic, or free-thinking communities. And so these individuals gather together to commune and talk about ethical living, sometimes social justice actions, and also basically just simple right relationship. Most humanists are not concerned about right beliefs, but they're more so concerned about right action. And so when it comes down to it, you get a kind of a cluster of diversity and a cluster of many different thoughts and different ways of engaging our understanding. So when it comes down to diversity and think about the work that I have to do, it is truly an antonym for segregation, really bringing not only not just like-minded people, but like-hearted people within the action of the work that we're trying to do. And that is beyond just serving serving one particular class or one particular gender or one particular race or so on and so forth. It expands that and broadens our horizons to engage on a collective front to serve our greater good.
Thank you so much, Jay. I'd like to pose the same question to Nadya.
Thank you for the question. For me, as an executive leader in a nonprofit setting, to me, diversity is a very holistic approach. It is not just, I think when people think about diversity, they simply think about race and ethnicity, and they don't necessarily think about full holistic diversity, which is inclusive of cultural and ethnic diversity, also neurodivergence, disabilities, thinking about like queer folk, trans folk, having actual adequate representation from many different identities in your staff and in your community, in your full community. So engaging those folks as a part of your community and welcoming them in. But again, setting the stage internally as an executive, it means welcoming those people onto your staff and into the community that your organization serves, and setting the stage for that.
Thank you so much, Nadya. EB, would you also like to respond to the question, and I can reread if necessary?
That would be lovely if you would, thanks.
Sure. As a leader, provide your personal definition of diversity and provide an example of what that would look like in an organization.
Well, so I live my life in the arts. That is where I have grown up and where I operate. And I think in terms of my leadership from an artistic perspective, I think of diversity in terms of narrative and which narratives are being centered, what we're learning from them, and what we are attempting to do with them. And so I think instead of just what diversity looks like, I think about what diversity feels like. And for me, diversity, embodying diversity as a concept, not just a word, not just a metric, is really about figuring out how we begin to broaden our definition of narrative, of how we understand each other, not only in terms of our racial, ethnic ability, religious background, but I think really in terms of what makes us tick. I said to a lot of people when we were all going through that great racial reckoning of 2020, and I was asked, what is diversity and how do you do it? I said to a lot of people that were starting book clubs and reading White Fragility and all of the other new sort of seminal works on anti-racism, it's really great to understand how anti-racism works, and it's great to understand what kills Black folks, but I'd much rather you understand how Black folks dream and how we liberate ourselves. And I think that's true of any equity-seeking group, any people of the global majority. I think to reduce it to whatever degree of marginalization they experience is to erase the actual thing that makes us human, which is what we hope and dream for ourselves and our families and future. So.
Thank you. Thank you. I love some of the things that I heard, but we're going to go ahead and move forward to the second question. According to the Council of Nonprofits, diversity within nonprofits and their boards is a sound business practice for multiple reasons. So it's proven to enhance innovation, boost high quality decision-making, and cause greater creativity. And also having more diversity in the board also allows unique perspectives, which shapes new strategies. As leaders in your, again, own organizations, why do you think that this sound and highly recommended strategy is not employed by more nonprofit organizations? And I'm going to pose that first to Nadya.
Thanks, Ryan. That is such a good question. I think in the nonprofit world, we suffer from what I like to call perfection paralysis. We continually look for the perfect, like, unicorn candidate. And if we're going to pursue like truly holistically diverse workforces, we can't look for perfection. We have to look for potential. We have to look for varied experience and depth. We also have to really step away from, requiring degrees for everything, because that is, honestly, a very elite requirement. And honestly, work experience matters more than a degree does. And I think we place too much emphasis on advanced degrees. We don't, in tandem, we don't pay people for those advanced degrees in the nonprofit world. And so for the, the few dollars that many of us are offering, we're asking for a lot of qualifications that don't necessarily measure up to the pay that we're offering also. So we have to be able to meet people where they are. And we should not be looking for perfectionism or perfection in writing samples or in cover letters or resumes. A typo here and there is not going to break the bank, unless, of course, we're talking about somebody who's applying for like a communications director position, where those things actually, very, very much matter. But if we're looking for some, entry-level positions, mid-level positions, we should be looking for candidates who have a lot of potential and who are passionate about the subject. I think some of the best hires that I've had are people who have never done what we do, but they had deep, resonating passion for the work, and it showed up with them when we hired them. So I think we have to see past these very Eurocentric ideas of perfectionism and professionalism when we are talking about bringing diverse folks who are not currently within our staff purview into the fold. We really need to be expanding that, and we have to stop being so afraid of hiring people that look less than perfect, if you will. Or coming with sets of challenges or accommodations that need to be met. We should not be afraid to rise to meet those needs for folks. The ADA is a very powerful, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is a very powerful document that we should be examining, and we should be, ensuring that we have those kinds of accommodations for new staff and other folks in our community. Again, the folks that we serve. How do we actually incorporate those accommodations into our core values as an organization? Those are things we should be thinking about.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nadya. I'm going to pose the same question to EB.
Well, if the question is why don't more organizations employ diversity as a strategy, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, it's the previous question, which is why do you think that this sound and highly recommended strategy is not employed by more nonprofit organizations, and the strategy to increase diversity in your organization and board?
Well, I think for the why, the reason it's not employed by more organizations is because more organizations don't actually want to do it. And a lot of the organizations that say they want to do it and try to do it don't do it. I think when organizations start to realize just how profound the changes are that needs to be made, it's a real test of the mettle. Do they actually have the will to go through with accommodating, and I shouldn't say accommodating, I should say inviting people into their fold that's going to change the way they operate day to day. And I'm not just talking about, making accommodations for physical abilities or even neurodivergence. I'm talking about being open to changing your own cultural identity to accept the fact that other people don't operate the same way. It's very hard work. It takes significant financial resources. It takes significant energy. It takes a real commitment to learning, and it takes a will to shift your cultural outlook and go beyond the bounds of what you're comfortable with on both a personal level and professional level and organizational level. Now, how to implement it? Well, I think there's a couple of different aspects to this, and it depends on what we mean by implementation. If we're going to implement it, if we're implementing it in order to not get called out, in order to sort of protect ourselves from a PR sense, that's one story, right? Then you hire as many colors of Benetton as you can, and you say, look at how diverse our organization is, and you spin this in a way that says, we value everybody and buy our product. But if we're going to do this meaningfully, the change starts way before those hires are made. The change has to be thinking about how you set your table and make your guest beds for the people that are going to be coming in, right? If you are going to hire people of the Muslim faith, for example, do you have a prayer room set aside? Do you have a place for them to practice their religion? If you're going to hire people who need certain dietary restrictions based on religious grounds, is your cafeteria prepared to do that? These are the practical things. Now, philosophically, does everyone in your organization understand what it means to commit a microaggression and how to avoid doing so when you're in the company of people who could be affected by your words and actions? We're talking about culture change that goes beyond simply making acquisitions to your team. It goes much more into how we conduct ourselves and how we see each other. So, the question's one and the same. How do you do it? A lot of hard work. Why don't you do it? Because it's hard work.
Thank you, EB. Jay.
I think, much of it has been said, but one of the things that really, kind of sits with me is like, I think about the culture that we have right now. And currently everybody is, I can probably ask this whole entire room in space, like, how many of you have friends on Facebook that you actually just chose just because, right? Or because you were interested in something that was different from you, or you probably asked the question, what is missing? I think a lot of the work here is about, like, we as leaders have to ask the question, not who belongs in our organization or who's a right fit for our organization, but what are we missing? And not because we're missing because we need to do a checkbox, or because we need to exploit gifts, talents, right? Culture. We need to actually do the work where we are willing to challenge our organization to see what are we going to become, not necessarily how we're going to belong, right? And I think if we do this work, and this is something that I sit with often, I am always asking the question, who is missing from my conversation? Who is missing as my thought partner? Who is missing as I walk along this work and do justice? Who is missing? Because if I think that I need to find someone who looks like me, thinks like me, acts like me, walks like I walk, talk like I talk, that's not going to do the work. What's going to do the work is when I decide to put myself not only in a situation that makes me uncomfortable, but makes me actually examine my humanity with somebody else's humanity to actually create a new materiality within my organization to create change. That's the funnel of change. That's how it happens. But we're not willing to do that because, like EB said, it is hard work. It is the thing that we don't like being uncomfortable. And so we have to be able, if we're really going to do leadership work, if we're really going to step into this role of practicing beyond belonging and get to becoming, we need to begin to push ourselves to arrive to a place where we are no longer comfortable and have relationships because we're comfortable. We have to have relationships because we're courageous.
Thank you. And I'm going to add my 2 cents to that. I love what each one of you said. And Jay, you finished with talking about humanity. When I think of organizations, companies 100 years ago were for the benefit of humankind. And so the idea of that the organization would be this entity and take advantage of didn't really exist in practice, I guess, throughout the US in practice. Of course, there are organizations that took advantage of humans. But I focus, when I think about increasing diversity, on several things. Humanity. Are you willing to integrate different types of human beings? Do you see them? Do you hear them? Are you listening to their voices? One of the reasons why I believe that nonprofits and other organizations do not see diversity is because the reluctance to listen, number one, to a different human, but also the reluctance to listen to a voice that may actually critique your voice or critique your systems, which could lead to change, and change is uncomfortable. And typically, the people who sit on the boards of these organizations are a homogeneous group who are very comfortable. And so listening, being willing to embrace radical change in order to do something different, in order to strategize differently to meet needs, those are the reasons why I believe that diversity is not as prevalent as it should be in this country. So I'm gonna ask the next question.
EB had his hand up real fast.
Oh, go ahead, EB.
I did. There's just sort of one piece to kind of bring that together for me. And that is, one of the responses I get a lot when we're talking about best practices in inclusion and diversity is, how is it good for business? And I think particularly in the nonprofit sector, we have really got to get rid of that question from our vocabulary, because the question really is, to sort of tag on to what all of us have been saying, how is that good for people? Because if people are doing well, the business is going to do well. We are nonprofit organizations. Our job is not to make profits. And we've got to figure out how to steer ourselves away from that model. We've got to figure out how to serve the communities we serve. And if it means we have to diversify our funding sources, that's what we got to do. But
yes,
we've got to figure out a way to make that shift, even emotionally, because there's a lot of societal forces that are pushing us into that profit loss model, a lot of societal forces that are pushing us towards a capitalistic paradigm, and that is not what we exist for.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that together. I love those points. The next question is, do you feel that ethics or lack of ethics play a part in our organizational leaders' reluctance to implement this strong supported principle of diversity? I'm gonna pose that question first to Jay. Do you feel like ethics or morality play a part in a reluctance for leadership to implement diversity?
that I would like to pose first is probably thinking about the work and the ancestor James Baldwin when he talks about love as a state of being. I know we all came here for a nonprofit conference and things, but I just, I think we can't talk about being a nonprofit or being a leader or running an organization unless we reflect on how these things come about, and they come about through you, right? You're the visionary, you carry it. So like love being a state of being, if your organization is based in some kind of practice or ethic, the question of that being must be rooted first in daring, something that is daring, something that offers us a quest, right? A journeying, right? A searching and examining. And it must also offer us the opportunity to, right, reflect, right? If we're going to be daring, having a quest, and being reflective, these are the methods that Baldwin talks about. And I think this is very important for us to look at when we are doing this work regarding our own ethics and how we come to this work, that our organizations are a reflection of ourselves. And the more that we interrogate it as an ethic, the more that we put ourselves in the daring quest to actually reevaluate some of the things that we have actually been reluctant to engage, not only just our own reluctancy, but what are our policies, right? What are our policies and how do we use them as practice? And are those policies also culturally biased, right? And because they're rooted in your own personal experience, but how have you enlarged your own cultural experience, right, along with yourself, and created a cultural ethic where people actually are engaging, right, from a collective standpoint to figure out, right, well, I don't practice this and I don't practice this, but what do you practice? And then we put it into question so that we can begin to formalize how we're going to evolve. And I think ethics has a lot to do with the evolution of how we want to see our organization, and not only in the now and the here and now, but also what we're trying to do in the future. But we've got to be able to ask the question of where we have not grown yet, or what we are actually lacking. I think, the last thing that I'll say about ethics as an evolution standpoint, and as it relates to the organization itself, is that we have to also get to a place where we offer clear assessments. I think organizations have failed to give people healthy feedback. And so, it's kind of like if you didn't meet this qualification, or if you didn't do this or offer this kind of performance, you failed, right? We're very performance based. And so one of the things that we have to begin to look at regarding our ethics is how we give people real healthy assessment and discernment, and how that comes across as an ethic that encourages critique and feedback and growth. We don't have a managerial philosophy that engages that much anymore. If you don't have the skill set, you're not hired. If you're not going to learn it, we're going to fire you, right? And so where do we rest there with engaging our own practice of, right, managerial development, leadership development, so that we can actually groom people and support people and take in the roles that we're currently in? I think that's what I ask when I think about diversity and when I think about ethics.
Thank you, Jay. I'm going to pose that question to Nadya, and yes, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Thank you, Ryan. I don't necessarily know that it's a matter of ethics. I think it's a matter of integrity, of personal integrity, and a level of honesty that people need to be willing to have about the reality of their organization. I will take, for example, my organization. My predecessor was an amazing, amazing fundraiser. And he put our organization into a really great financial position. But what he knew is that he was not able to organize the humanist community and young people and Black and Brown people the way that it needed to be done in order to welcome a new swath of humanists into our movement. he was not capable of that. He had not done movement building. He had not done community building. He had not worked to build youth movements. There's a lot of work that he had not done in that way. And he knew that the organization and the movement needed a leader who was a person of color, preferably a Black woman, or a queer person, or some person who was a more diverse person than he was. And he stepped aside and has gone to another organization, and the board and the search committee found me, someone who has done all of that work before, and has lots of experience. We have to be willing to put people into positions of power who come with really diverse and interesting perspectives and who are not afraid to be disliked. I'm already getting a little bit of that from some folks in our movement, which is fine. It's perfectly fine. People don't have to agree with me, to sit in coalition with me in our organization. But we have to be willing to make really difficult decisions in order to move forward as a movement. The other piece of leadership is that we have to be willing to lead from behind. And we have to set back and invite our staff to culture build and collaborate on community norms and agreements to decide how they want to work. I believe it was, I will go back to James Baldwin. I believe he said something about, I don't have a dream job. I don't dream of labor. Nobody wants to go to work, but yet and still we have bills to pay and we have to eat. So why do we need to make the workplace and the work environment unpleasant? Why does it need to be odious to anyone on staff? Why can we not sit down together and allow our staff to decide how they want to work, what those community agreements look like? And we as leaders need to be able to say, you know what, that's perfectly fine. For example, our staff, where would you want to work? I don't care if you come in sweats. Your job does not depend on what you wear. Those of us that may go in front of camera, yes, we keep clothes hanging in our offices or readily accessible in case we need to do an interview. But for the most part, I don't care what my staff wears to work. What does it matter? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if, as a Black woman, your hair is wrapped up and you got your bonnet on. I don't care. Fine, you have no makeup, not a problem. I don't care how people show up to work. I care that they show up and that they're happy and settled and ready to serve, because that is the attitude that we do this work with. In the nonprofit sector, we're here to serve and love and respect the people in our community. So that's the only adornment that I ask people to come to work with is that attitude of service. And if we can do that, then we're fine. But we all as leaders have got to be willing to put down these Eurocentric ideas of what professionalism is. We have to be able to decolonize our workplace and these standards that we've been that have been foisted on us, and that we bring to the workplace, particularly Black folks and people of color. We hold on to these standards and norms because it's the only way that we were taught for generations that we could succeed. And it's really hard for us to step back and say, you know what, I don't have to do this, and it doesn't matter what it looks like to other people, to those other people in the landscape. We have to be brave enough to step out of those roles and to do what we know is right, and invite our staff to help create our own community agreements and policies that make sense for us.
Wow, powerful. Thank you so much, Nadya. Before we move to the next question, and any of the humanists can take this question, it's in the chat. What is humanism? Who'd like to take us? Which one of the leaders would like to take a stab at that?
I did pop in that is literally the textbook definition that I put there. But as for humanists, we are essentially a community of atheists and agnostics. And we believe that we can make moral decisions for ourselves, and we don't need to depend on any kind of reward or punishment to guide our actions. We place people and human dignity and respect at the center of all of the things that we do for the benefit of people. And so we love things that bring enhancement and beauty into the world. So we lean very heavily into arts and culture, into legal advocacy and politics, policies. So for example, the American Humanist Association, we do that through advocacy, lobbying on the Hill. We also do that through legal challenges, but we also build a really, really strong community and a vibrant community. a grassroots community, a movement that is here to support people and welcome people who may be marginalized or are just looking for like-minded people who believe in service and love and respect for one another.
Thank you, Nadya. This will probably be our last question, as we don't have that much time left. How do we do the work of restorative and transformative justice for those who desire or who are struggling in dealing with changes in behavior and confronting realities? Are there any steps? How do we do the work of restorative and transformative justice for those who desire and or struggling in dealing with changes in behavior and confronting realities? Who would like to take a stab at that? Go ahead, EB.
So the first thing that we need to think about is, what are we restoring to? We'd like to talk about restorative justice in the context of these organizations, but so often we never set a foundation to come back to begin with. And you cannot restore to what isn't there. So unless you're starting now with proactive conversations that build community and connection within your organization, by the time there's a problem, you got nowhere to go. It's going to become punitive because it's the only language that everybody's going to understand that's universal, right? Ultimately, restorative justice should, in fact, replace HR functions in a lot of ways, right? You shouldn't need a department. And let's get it real. Let's be real. The HR department is there to protect the organization, not the people. That's its function. It's there to impose artificial accountability and punishment on somebody, assign fault, and avoid liability, right? Restorative justice is a long process that does not start when harm occurs. Restorative justice is a process that begins the moment that someone enters a space. And when those relationships are being built, you're actually building touchstones and mile markers to return to, so that when there's a problem, we can go, look, we have a foundation together. Here's where we established trust. Here's where we lost it. How do we come back to that point where we lost our way and we can proceed again, right? With accountability, with acknowledgement. Truth comes before reconciliation, then we can reconcile and start build anew. So I think we got to be really careful about that term of restorative justice, right? Until we're really clear that we have a foundation to come back to.
Thank you. Jay?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, to add to just Evie's point, like, thinking about foundation, like, I think we have to look at sometimes I think we have to break the foundation. Because the truth of the matter is, most of these organizations are not set up in the way that, let's just be real. Most organizations, if they, nonprofits, they start off as community. And then by the time we start going into wanting to file 501c3s and focus on marketing, we lose that community organizing, and then struggle to find, and then struggle again by turning into an organization to find that community, because we've used everybody else up. We've lost our focus. We've lost our mission, because the foundation that it was on, right, only kind of lifted up one person, right? I mean, it might have a little bit of a Justin Timberlake complex, or it might have a little bit of Beyonce complex after starting from Destiny's Child, and then you got this wonderful person that's bright and shiny, and then we've forgotten, our mission, and we don't know what to come back to. And some of us could probably do a good job, EB, thank you for saying this, but also with that restorative practice, just breaking the foundation, rebranding, going through missions, adjusting bylaws, and really getting to the restorative process of justice to say, I want to renew the hope that we first started off with together. And that, and if it's not there, then start building for a future that says, I'm gonna break this foundation so that this new generation, this new incoming leader can take the place and hold the torch and run with it better than I did.
Fantastic. I'm going to summarize some of what we've said in moving toward the integration of social equity. I heard we're going to change the model. We should focus on changing the model or changing the foundation, because the model does not prioritize humanity. The second step, prioritize humanity over the entity or the systems within the entity. Be willing to reimagine how you operate, who participates, who you're advocating for, who is at the table, who is in leadership, how different people can have different characteristics and be qualified to lead the organization. Conduct deep listening for people who do not look like, who do not sound like, who do not come from where you come from. So that is making space for other voices, particularly marginalized voices. And lastly, build community. Build community by making space for people, for different opinions, for even opinions of people who critique your style, your strategy, etc. I want to thank you again for this opportunity. I want to say thank you to Dr. Richard Gregory Johnson III and staff, and also to the Social Equity Leadership Conference for this opportunity to present. I believe that we have now reached our time. Thank you, panelists, Dr. Jay Hooper, E.B. Smith, and Nadya Dutchins. Thank you so much for